Government of India, and that is how we find the number of insurgent groups tend to have not got reduced. I think this Daimari group, if you see and this has also led to, and we have seen that the complication that we saw in the context of the signing of accord, which we talked about yesterday, is that when certain factions of the insurgent group tend to sign some accord with the Government of India, and because of the rise of extremist insurgency within the ethnic groups, tend to make the new ethnic insurgent group to come and dismiss the peace accord, which might have been signed by members of their own group with the Government of India. So here we have a very complicated scenario, but nonetheless, since democracy is a government of the people, by the people, for the people, there has been an effort at arriving at some kind of a solution where probably the people's rights can be respected, which is what democracy stands for, rather than merely sacrifice the rights of the general people in the name of a few ethnic insurgent activists who may be committing violent activities of violence against the so-called state interests or against the so-called Indian state. And that is where we find that we saw that this constitutional consensus building agreement, I think if you go into net, you can be able to find out more and more study. This has been attempted in various conflict areas where we see that it has really had some kind of a balming effect, and where the insurgent activities has really come down to the minimum. Even in the Northeast India, is only because there is not only, if it has had limited result, is only because that we find that there has been a multiplicity of insurgent groups over the period of time, rather than they remain confined to few groups. And that is where I think that is so solely because of the diversity in India, where, as we talked about in the Northeast, we saw 220 ethnic groups who are present, and that is how I think India has to wait for. Since I've studied this problem, I could see that when you are carrying on with the democratic activities or with the democracy, one has to probably see that all the communities will perhaps go in a cyclical mode in having their own ethnic groups and signing accord with the Government of India, and where they think that by doing that kind of an activity, they will be able to not only get recognition for their own communities, they will also will be able to assure the so-called socio-economic or the fulfillment of the socio-economic wishes of the members of their respective communities. So there has been while there has been increase in the number of insurgent groups, there has also been increase in the amount of violence that is being seen in terms of the insurgent activities in the region. So then that is how we find that the negotiation mediation, which is a part of the democratic activities where the Government of India tends to sign peace accords with the ethnic groups, tend to have had limited result, but nonetheless the process seems to be continuing, because that is the only way that peaceful tackling of the conflict can be possible, rather than using usages of any kind of armed power or engaging the Indian military or paramilitary forces to root out the militants. Because we can see that if you so like, one can also say that militancy is in the mind rather than in any kind of a body. In the sense, militancy is a kind of a thought which can be only tackled by propagation of peaceful alternative ideas or peaceful resolution of the conflict, rather than any kind of a use of violence. But then nonetheless, we should remember the negotiation violence seems to have continued, despite the fact it has had not so bright result, but it has had limited result. So here in this context, if we look into another kind of a solution mechanism, which has been talked about by the intellectuals, that seems to be known as rights-based approach to development. Because if you find that if you ever wonder that why the government should be very quick enough, should be solely dedicated to a signing of the accord when the accords don't stand the ground. I think Mizoram is the only state. I don't know whether anyone is from Mizoram here, but you will see Mizoram is the only state where we find that the peace has come out of the accord which was signed with the Mizo National Front, or previously it was Mizo Union, and then that is where we find that the accord has stood the ground, and rather than being dismissed by any other insurgent group within the Mizo community. But even in the case of Bodoland, you will see that there are still differences amongst the various groups within the Bodo community, who tend to be not quite happy with the accord that has been signed by the with the government of India by the so-called Bodo groups. But nonetheless, when you talk about the rights-based approach to development activities tend to be thought that probably since the socioeconomic causes of development tend to contribute much more towards a sense of feeling of alienation of the ethnic communities vis-a-vis the other communities, other advanced communities who may be living in their vicinity or in their neighborhood and neighborhood of the respective states. And we also find that there has been a socioeconomic sense of socioeconomic feeling of alienation when they compare themselves with the rest of the India. When we find that the rest of the India tend to have everything that the modern society can boast of, Northeastern India seems to have been deprived of. But the scenario has changed quite a lot. I think we find, despite the fact that the developmental process has been rather slow, but nonetheless, when you compare today with 1947 or with 1970s or 70s or 80s, we find Northeast state has had quite a lot of development activities. Not maybe in terms of the development activities which is found in the metropolitan areas, but still Northeastern India now tends to have a bigger say in the context of allocation of resources, in the context of allocation of various government policies, and also in terms of the kind of extra dose of assistance where the states have tried to do their best given the limitation of governance or whatever we say, and Northeastern India now can say that it is now connected to the mainstream India, no matter what the ethnic militant groups may be saying. But I can see that compared to when I have been here for more than almost quarter of a century, I could see that when it was in a state of disconnect, now it is in a state of in my own way, I coined the term in a state of interconnectedness, because now when you from the Northeast, one can always reach the other parts of the country and world without wasting any more time, which is not the case in other parts of the country, simply because the Northeast has had a kind of a liberal dose of assistance. So, but nonetheless, we need to go back to a kind of since the ethnic conflicts tend to be present, we need to talk about another solution mechanism, another framework of conflict resolution, which is known as rights-based approach to development. And this rights-based approach to development tend to have emerged as a kind of a moral approach to development in the post-Cold War era. Since after 1998, we find when the Cold War era came to an end, we find that the rights-based approach tends to have emerged as a kind of a very significant moral approach, significant novel approach, significantly new and unique approach to ushering development in the so-called hitherto neglected regions of Northeast, regions of various countries, where it was believed that probably development can probably be the panacea of all the ills which may be contributing to rise in negative activities in those areas of conflict. And here we find that the right-based approach tends to have redefined in the context of the right-based approach. This particular novel approach tends to have redefined the power of the state and also of the individual after the end of the dichotomy of right versus left, because we know that the Cold War era, if you remember, which went on up to 1991, we see that this Cold War era was not only an aligned system, it was also a kind of a mutual competition between the groups who had allegiance to the forces of which can be said forces of the right wing, which is opposed to the so-called left wing or the so-called communists, who were members of Warsaw. So the Cold War era was primarily confined to between the mutual competition between that of the NATO and that of the so-called Warsaw Treaty group of nations. So here we find after this, since the Cold War ended in the dichotomy of the left and right, and seems to have made after the dissolution of the Soviet Union, since the left forces tend to have become much more weakened, this right-based development approach tend to have redefined both power of the state and also has also sought to redefine the power of the individual, where the individual and the state are not being seen any more dichotomous than what they were seen before. And in the post-Cold War era, we see that there have been many developmental agencies because of the fact that there has been a decrease in the in the so-called mutual hatred towards each other, which was present between the NATO group of countries led by America and also the communist group of nations who were members of the Warsaw Pact Treaty. Various developmental agencies tend to have come up to play their important role in the context of the ushering of the peace in the world and also in the ushering of developmental process in the so-called countries of the world. So in the post-Cold War, we find that the many developmental agencies, human resource agencies or organizations tend to have begun to insist on a kind of as per Western belief, on a particular kind of a thinking which was not being emphasized before. So these developmental agencies, which includes, you can talk of UNDP, you can talk of other ActionAid, and there are other various developmental groups, as we call it, international NGOs, who are present, who have been carrying on pioneering work in the context of realization of the rights of the neglected communities in the world. And they, as per the Western belief, seem to have insisted on a particular thinking which was not talked about so very virulently before. And what was that new idea that they have been demanding? They have been saying their rights are, asserted through responsibility, duties, transparency, trust, and accountability. And that is where we find that in the post-Cold War era, we must have also remembered there has been a demand for good governance, because the developmental agencies, when they were carrying out the task, development activities in the various parts of the world, they found that probably lack of good governance not only contributed towards non-fulfillment of the various objectives of the government policies, that has also this lack of good governance also tend to contribute towards an increased level of corruption, which amounts to siphoning up the much needed scarce public resources which are needed for the development activities of various communities and geographical areas, and tend to be siphoned out, tend to be stolen away from the public treasury, and tend to go into private, very, very selected private ends. And here, I think if you talk of corruption, we find that while there has been a saying that corruption, everybody tends to be involved, but more or less it is seen that the corruption tends to be primarily a kind of a beneficiary mechanism for the so-called elites who are socio-economic and business elites. And that is where the lack of good governance tend to be contributing towards rising corruption, and rising corruption tend to again lead to a sense of what you call it, alienation within and across the communities. But nonetheless, this human resources and developmental organizations started to insist, as for the Western belief, that they said the rights are asserted through responsibility. Rights can also be asserted through duties. Rights can also be asserted through transparency, trust, and accountability. I think if you remember that this kind of trust, accountability, they came up into public parlance because of the demand for good governance led by the development groups, under the World Bank. I think if you Google good governance, you'll come to know tremendous amount of research which has been carried on good governance in various parts of the world, and there also you will see that the origin of the term of good governance is primarily owed to World Bank, which is again a developmental agency. And here we find they say the rights can be asserted through duties, rights can be asserted through responsibility, rights can be asserted through transparency, rights can be asserted through trust, and also more particularly accountability. In 1993, we find that the UN World Conference on Human Rights, which held in Vienna, tend to have issued what is known as Vienna Declaration and Program of Action, in which it reiterated the link between democracy, human rights, sustainability, and development. In other words, the UN, since UN, as we said, is a developmental agency, although it has a collective security as a mechanism, but nonetheless, since UNDP has been created by the UN to carry on the development activities on behalf of the United Nations, in the 1993 Vienna Conference of Human Rights, UN tend to have at the end of every international meeting, conference, as the practice, there has been the issue of joint declarations, which tend to reiterate the expressed consensus in terms of ideas which have been arrived through by the member state through their discussion. And here in 1993, UN Human Rights Convention in Vienna tend to have, in its own declaration and program of action, tend to have emphasized on the fact that there is a kind of inevitable or inseparable link between democracy and human rights, and also sustainability and development. I think, if we're talking about sustainability, we remember that we are now under the declaration of on the appeal of the United Nations, the whole world, including the 192 plus countries, tend to be engaged in achieving the various parameters which are in the 17 fields which are known as UN Sustainable Developmental Goals, which the member states or the various member countries tend to be under some kind of an obligation to achieve those parameters right up to 2030. So this, UN SDG, as we talk about, I think you are all young teachers, you must be also carrying on research on the Sustainable Development Goals, where you find that the goals which are UN SDG, which came up after MDG, Millennium Development Goals, tend to be a kind of advancement over that of Millennium Development Goals, and tend to also set out some parameters which, if they are duly achieved by the various member countries, will make our countries and our own human societies in the respective countries much more advanced, much more developed, and we will not be complaining of any more deprivation. But then that depends on the member states, various countries of the United Nations, who are members of the United Nations, to achieve those parameters. But why I talked about, because that talk about sustainable development goals. I think you must have also have time to look at the SDG when you are identifying or researching on the various conflicts which are there, both in the northeastern region, in your own societies, or in other societies, and in the rest of the world, in the various regions of the world. You can very well see whether even SDG goals which are being talked about can at all help in the resolution of the conflict, or it will tend to aggravate. Because as intellectuals of the country, we need to also have a kind of a thought processes where we should not only make us known, which should also help us to make our ideas known in terms of uniqueness in contributing towards the so-called, as we call it, nation-building process that is going and the integration that is going on in the world amongst the countries today. So here when we talk about when we go back to 1993, we find that the United Nations Human Rights Conference of Vienna tend to emphasize on the link between sustainability and development, and also between democracy and human rights. In other words, they said that it said probably democracy should also be the way democratic governance will be carried on, should be able to respect the rights of the human beings rather than contribute towards deprivation of the basic rights of the people, and should not at all made people away from enjoyment of the rights which they are entitled to be by virtue of being the members of the human society, and also also by virtue of the operation of the, which is on it, UN what's the called? UN Human Rights Goals, which was conceived in 1949, and they call it United Nations. I forgot. This was by I think, if you remember, some of the women teachers must be knowing that famous woman who was the spouse of the then US president, but nonetheless she was a very, very prominent activist in her own right, and Eleanor Roosevelt tend to have contributed towards the so-called rights of the human rights, which came into practice in 1950. And this is called, I'm forgetting the term, I'll tell you a little later. But 1950, if you Google, you can find that the UN, this is just escaping on my tongue. Anyway, so 1950, that human rights document which added to the United Nations after having been finalized in 1949, came to have emphasized on the respect for human rights. Here, that is Geneva. I'm just forgetting. Anyway, so I'll tell you a little later when the lecture is over. And here we find that this United Nations Convention of 1993 came to, and by its declaration of the link that should be existing between that should be existing between what we call it, existing between the development and democracy, human rights and democracy, sustainability and development, tend to have motivated the policymakers to go in for incorporation of that right-based approach, in the context of ushering in developmental activities in the country. When you talk about 1950, I think I just forgot, it's called Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which came up in 1950. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights tend to have emphasized on the respect of human rights as they have been coined in that Universal UDHR, Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and which tend to be now emphasized by the various development agencies in the context of carrying out their development activities in various parts of the world. So the policymakers came under force to demand to incorporate those rights which were there in the UDHR, Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and also because of the policy declarations by the United Nations Human Rights Conference in Vienna. Now we find the right-based approach tend to have crept into, or you can, if you like, integrated into the various policies of development which are being carried on by the policymakers of various countries. So now we have a system where the rights are being respected rather than any kind of a charity which was before. And here we find development agencies tend to believe that this incorporation of the right-based approach can perhaps help in the transformation of power relations which tend to be present in any particular communities or amongst the communities who tend to be members of any particular state. So development agencies tend to believe that right-based approach would certainly will create a kind of a positive atmosphere, would lead towards an era of positive transformation in terms of the new kind of power sharing arrangement that it will bring in as soon as right-based approach is integrated into the so-called developmental process. And then they say not only it will lead to a new kind of a new power sharing arrangement or new kind of a power relations that will exist between the rulers and the ruled. It will also create some kind of a new power sharing arrangement between that of the developmental agencies or other developmental actors and also the people of the state. And under the right-based development model that is being talked about towards tackling of the so-called ethnic conflicts in the various regions of the world, it is also felt that under this right-based developmental model, there are two stakeholders which would be considered to be very important from this particular right-based approach to development. And they say that under this right-based approach, there will be two stakeholders, primary two stakeholders. One will be the right holders. One group will be, one stakeholder will be known as right holders, and the other ones will be known as duty bearers. So because we talked of the duties which came up as on the insistence of the UN, on the insistence of the developmental agencies, they say that the right holders who will be known as right holders will be consisting of people who do not experience full rights. Those people who do not have who have not been able to enjoy their rights to the fullest extent possible in any particular governance structure in any particular state, and those people would be known as right holders because their rights are yet to be fulfilled, and hence the development activities must cater to their need in the context of ushering in or undertaking of developmental activities in the areas of conflict or within any particular within any particular society or within the particular state. And the duty bearers, the other group, which will be the other stakeholders, which will be known as duty bearers, they will be consisting of institutions which are obligated to fulfill the holders' rights. The duty bearers will be consisting of the various political and other economic institutions who are obligated by virtue of their existence to fulfill the rights of the people who have still not been able to enjoy their rights to the fullest extent compared with the other advanced ethnic communities. So here the rights-based development model, as we talk about, tends to aim at strengthening the capacity of duty bearers, and tends to empower the right holders. The beauty of the right-based conflict resolution model seems to be lying in the fact that it tends to aim at strengthening the capacity of the duty bearers, and also will empower the so-called right holders. We all understand that if at all, at any point of time, the development activities tend to be not undertaken in the right earnest, or tend to not be implemented in the fullest sense of the term. It's simply because they tend to fail because of the incapacity of the various political institutions, political and economic institutions, which are bound to carry on those development tasks to the fullest extent as planned up to the point of dots. But nonetheless, we find that if they fail, often you will find the explanation which is often given is that the institutions tend to lack capacity, or do not have adequate capacity, or do not have the minimum required capacity, which tends to come in the way of carrying on various development activities and to fulfill the development activities in a time-bound manner. I think, the kind of workshop that we are attending, and when we are talking to each other, this is also aimed at capacity building. That where, if we are able to be imbued with new thoughts, significant thoughts, if you find some of the significant, and you will see that your capacity, which we felt was not enough, would also get elongated, or to say can get enlarged to an extent that where you will no more be sitting idle and merely talking. You'll also be forced to undertake certain actions in the context of your respective communities, or in the context of our own societies, which will contribute towards the as we call it, socio-economic development, and also a rising prosperity of our own human societies. And these are all possible because of the enhancement of the capacities which human beings tend to fill of being in possession of. Anyway, so this is our capacity building. So here, the development this right-based development model tend to aim at strengthening the capacity of the duty bearers, which who are the political and economic institutions, who are under constitutional responsibility to fulfill the rights of the people. And also, this same right-based development model is also aimed at empowering the so-called right holders, where the right holders whose rights have not been fulfilled by the so-called political institutions, by the duty bearers, would have a greater say in the context of framing of various development policies to be implemented in their own land. I think if you talk of Panchayati Raj, as we talked about probably yesterday or before, and we saw that the Panchayati Raj model, which I think I talked to you about Gandhi and Panchayati Raj, and where you see Panchayati Raj model is being now, or you call it local developmental administration, which is known as Panchayati Raj, tends to be now given more importance simply because it tends to facilitate the consultation of local people in a given panchayat, in a given political territory of panchayat, be it in a lower panchayat, be it in gram panchayat, be it in intermediate panchayat, or be it in, as you call it, zonal district. I think you call it district panchayat. Zonal panchayat, you'll find that under these three models of Panchayati Raj system, people's consultation has been facilitated in the context of both planning of the policies, which is expected, which is presumed will be fulfilling, which is presumed to take into account the needs of the local area and local population, rather than be a repetition of as it was before, planned from above. And often the reason was pointed out that because the plans are conceived in Delhi, as we call it, famous in ivory towers, or by the people who seem to have no idea about the location for which the plans are being framed, they often used to end up in failure. So in order to save the resources, in order to also bring about a sense of satisfaction amongst the people of any particular area where development seems to be in much more greater demand, this Panchayati Raj, or the local development model, or the development administration seems to have been reformed to an extent where the political institutions would be able to would be able to plan in a manner that they would be fulfilling the rights of the right holders, the communities who tend to have not enjoyed the rights to the promised extent, and also it will also empower the local people to have their voices felt in the context of planning by these so-called duty bearers. So the right-based development model also seems to, under UN auspices, we find that a common understanding of human rights-based developmental model has been reached, which is now being followed by various developmental agencies, including the various member states of United Nations. So, whereas this common document has been framed, which is known as Common Understanding of Human Rights-based Developmental Model under the UN, it seems to consist of 6 principles. I think in the context of the right-based model, 6 principles are now being held to be very, very sanguine by the United Nations, and which is now being held by the member states, which tend to be considered to be of greater relevance in the context of promotion of right-based development in the various areas of, as you call it, economic negligence or maldevelopment, or if you so like, a situation of non-development. And here, those 6 principles tend to be comprising of, the first principle tend to be universality and inalienability. In other words, the first principle under the UN auspices in the common document of common understanding tends to be emphasizing that the development and human rights should be treated to be one and cannot be separated from each other. And they should also be treated as universal values or universal goals which need to be respected in the context of promotion of any developmental model. So universality and inalienability seems to be one of the most important principles in the UN document on common understanding in the promotion of right-based development in the various parts of the world. And here the second principle tend to be upheld by the UN document is that of indivisibility. In addition to inalienability, we find that this kind of rights, the relationship between the rights and development cannot be divided from each other. They cannot be separated from each other. They can also one cannot be promoted at the cost of the other. That is what is known as indivisibility. The third principle that has been upheld by the UN under the Common Understanding document is the interdependency and interrelatedness. It tends to promote that there will be interdependence and also interrelatedness, which will be comprising, which will be part and parcel of the so-called right-based model of development, or any developmental model. I think the fourth principle that it tends to emphasize is on equality and non-discrimination, because we know that when you talk of developmental processes, we find that certain areas within a particular society, particular state tends to have much better public facilities than what tends to be present in one's own area. And that tends to create a sense of feeling of alienation, feeling of discrimination, feeling of not being treated well, feeling of not equal treatment. The fourth principle seems to be emphasizing on equality and non-discrimination amongst the people when development practices, development activities are being promoted by the so-called institutions, or as you call it, duty bearers. So, and we find the fifth principle tends to be emphasizing on participation and inclusion, and that's where we find, if at all, I think over the period of time, if you have seen that there has been a kind of a rise in the tremendous amount of expenditure by the Election Commission to encourage people, or to sort of encourage or to sort of persuade people to vote at the time of elections, whether it is to local bodies or it is to the local legislative assembly, or at the time of election to our parliament, Lok Sabha. It's only because that it has been felt that there should be participation of all manners of people, all kinds of people, irrespective of the fact that whether they live in the urban areas or in the rural areas, irrespective of their location in the economic scale, whether they belong to rich or belong to the poor. It's simply because that the whole development process now is dependent upon increased participation and also, as you call it, increased amount of inclusion, where the developmental process is now being thought to aim at more and more inclusion of people into its own framework, rather than exclude any community, which will again create a feeling of alienation and will complicate the task of governance, and as you say, will give rise to again, rise of ethnic insurgency or ethnic conflicts in various regions of the world. So here, in addition to participant inclusion, the sixth principle tends to talk about accountability and rule of law. I think when you talk of, I don't know whether you have read about the governance which is being carried out in Odisha. I don't know whether you read. We should talk about it today. I think I will finish it in 5 minutes, and we must hear from you as to what has been your activities. Because if you have been reading about the various developmental activities which are being carried on by various states, including Odisha, you will find that not only the Chief Minister of Odisha has been able to promote a kind of a high encouragement to the Indian hockey team, both to the men's hockey and women's hockey. And you must have also read that not only you see that that Naveen Patnaik has been, I don't know, when Odisha hosted the national hockey meet, the Odisha government had promised 100 crores to sponsoring of the Indian hockey team, both men and women wing, which enabled them to participate in the Olympics, which just concluded in Tokyo, and where although the women hockey team could win, the men hockey could not win, but nonetheless we could see that this has and sorry, I think the men hockey team won. I'm just getting a little confused, and then where you find that when the team came back from when the team came back from Olympic after having won the won a bronze medal and having lost also, Indian men's hockey won the bronze and women lost. But nonetheless, this was possible because of the because of the state government's assistance of 100 crores to the Indian hockey team, which not only promoted encouragement towards our own Indian traditional game, that is hockey. We also see that the Odisha government has been also able to carry out a governance model, which is mostly now based on what we call it, based on IT, information technology, where it tends to emphasize on 5T. I will not tell you because there is no time to discuss with you, but I think I just want to leave the thoughts with you so that you should be able to Google and read more about it as to how the of the 5T, they call it the development model now based on 5 T's. T for T, as we write, T for Tata or T for T. So this 5 T's also includes transparency as a kind of an objective. And here we find, if we talk about it, we find that this kind of transparency and accountability tend to have gained ground in the context of the so-called modern governance, which is being carried on by various states in the context of the human rights-based model of development. So here, when you talk about the 6 principles in the UN human rights, rights model based of rights-based model of development, we find that this particular new model of approach tend to be representing a shift away from welfare model, which was before and has now become a kind of a ownership model. I think, if you talk about the changes which have come up in the world and in your own country in the context of the development projects, you'll find that people are now encouraged, motivated to take ownership of the developmental projects which are being carried on in their own vicinity for the benefit of their own community or for the benefit of their own society, rather than merely leaving it for the developmental agencies, including the so-called contract agencies, to merely carry on the development. And in that context, you must have seen that there has been the rise of or appearance of new terminology, which was not known to us before this right-based development came into being. Which one of the thing you must have talked about, must have heard, is the now social audit of the projects. That where after the projects are carried on, the people of the same society are asked to carry on an audit to review the work, whether it has been done it has been done as per its plan, or it has been done differently and not going to be of any use or help to the communities. You talk of social audit, you talk of other kind of review mechanism which have come up, and these are all in the context of promotion of ownership model. When we feel that the project which is being implemented by the institutions, or as you call it, duty bearers, we must go and see, take some time out to see that the projects are being done as it is under plan, or we do not. Because previously people were not carrying on the review, and hence it was resulting in the non-implementation or in the bad implementation of the projects, which used to lead to public wastage. But nonetheless, we find that this tends to, and that this right-based model tend to be representing a kind of a shift away from the so-called welfare model, where people were merely treating themselves as a recipient of the benefit, rather than being owner or part and parcel of the implementation of the project, where since the projects are being undertaken to promote the socio-economic benefit of the local communities, people now are being treated as the owner of the resources of the various socio-infrastructure development projects, rather than being merely treating themselves as recipients, as is the case under the so-called welfare state model. Even if this project, this right-based is being carried on in the overall under the overall concept of right-based model, welfare state model, but yet it is quite different from what we traditionally understand as welfareism, or a kind of a welfare model which is largely promoted by any democratic state. So here we find is not only a shift away, but under this model we find the poor are construed as actors or right holders. Under this right-based model of development, the poor people, the poor communities, or the poorer communities are treated as actors, or they are treated as right holders. That their rights have to be somewhat realized through the undertaking or completion of the development projects, which in their own vicinity, in the neighborhood of their own communities, where they would be able to benefit the maximum, rather than anybody else away from that geographical or from that society. And the poor are, and under this right-based model, we find the poor are helped to overcome obstacles and they are empowered to overcome the obstacles to their realization of rights, which were the case before the right-based model of development was undertaken. So this seems to be empowering the poor, where their rights are taken care of, their rights are fulfilled by virtue of these development practices, rather than any kind of exclusionary practices, which was the case before, which had led to exclusion of the neighboring communities from any development project, even though it was being undertaken in their own vicinity or in their own neighborhood. And the aim of this model is to increase the capacity of both duty bearers and also the right holders. And under the capacity, and since the aim is to increase the capacity of the both people, it is not one-sided, both the right holders and also the duty bearers. Yeah, under this capacity building thrust of human rights right-based developmental model, it is being thought that the ability of the individuals, institutions, and the societies would be increased to a very, very great extent. Since it empowers, since it is a holistic framework, since it is inclusive in terms of paying attention towards capacity building of both the right holders and also both the duty bearers, it aims at enhancing the capacity of not only communities, it also tends to enhance the capacity of institutions, it also tends to enhance the capacity of the societies as well. And it is felt that once the capacity of these the two stakeholders plus the society is increased, it can be seen that both institutions and the right holders, that is the poor people or the poorer societies or the so-called excluded communities who are being sought to be integrated into developmental practices by promoting the sense of inclusion. It is felt that all of them will be able to perform their respective functions. The institution, the society, the individuals would be enabled to perform their functions in the right earnest, and they would also thereby would be able to solve problems that are quite rampant in their own respective societies. So here we find it is, if we talk to Panchayat Raj, we now see that it is now advocating local solutions to local problems by local people rather than by any other external agency or people who may not be who may not be in the knowledge, who may not be having the knowledge of the problems, and also thereby who may not be having a knowledge about adequate solutions which can be adopted to tackle the problem of deprivation, which causes conflict in the various societies of our own world. So here you find that not only tends to aim at performing enabling people to the institutions and society to perform their functions. It also tends to increase their capacity to solve their own problems by being constantly involved in the so-called promotion of local area-based developmental projects in their own locality. So, if you go back to a little bit saying they think locally, act globally, and here when you talk about think locally, it also now, I think this particular slogan which came up, think locally, act globally, is also now being enlarged to say think locally, act locally, and also you can think globally and also act globally. Because by bringing in the global understanding, global knowledge about our own problems, the global research as we call it, we will be able to not only tackle our present day problems that are, as we call it, endemic in our own respective areas or communities, it will also help us to prevent emergence of any such negative, or as we call it, insidious activities which may go against the interest of the whole communities. Anyway, so here under this right-based model development, it is also recognized that the duty bearers and right holders both will be treated as active agents of development. I think if you have studied sociology, you must, so in sociology, they have a very particular term which is used, which is known as agencies. So here, since agencies tend to promote development, here both people and institutions, instead of being alienated from each other, instead of being spilling any kind of a separation from each other, instead of not being treated, not having any bond, this particular model will promote a kind of a very active bond amongst these people and the institutions, since they both will be treated as actors, and they will be treated as active actors or active agencies of development in their own locality. And you will find, so here it is said that not only there will be active agencies of development, the duty bearers would remain accountable. So the duty bearers are institutions; they would remain accountable for respecting and protecting and fulfilling the human rights as has been enunciated by the UDHR, Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and also by the so-called governmental policies which tend to promote fulfill of development. I think if we ever understand, the Northeast has been now, Northeast now connected by flights to not only to Delhi but also within the northeastern part. I think if you at all find that the government of India has promoted that scheme called UDAN. I don't know if do you know the scheme of, do you know the abbreviation of UDAN, UDN? Any of you can tell me the definition, the abbreviation of UDAN, UDN? Hello?
Sir, no, sir. I am not aware of that.
The UDAN is Udta Desh ka har ek nagrik. So that is how, you see, UDAN is that, that if you at all think that people are, why is there need to provide flight air connectivity between North India and Delhi? It's only because that this is also that when we find the rich people are flying not only within the country, they're flying abroad. The government of India also, in the context of the fulfillment of the rights, is also working on these policies to enable that everybody's right is respected, everybody is enabled to enjoy the rights, and nobody is made to feel a sense of alienation, sense of separation, sense of discrimination vis-a-vis the people of the rest of the country. Anyway, so here we find, so here it is recognized that this particular model will not only promote accountability of the institution bearers by the governmental agencies towards the people, it will also enable the right holders to develop a kind of attitude where they will ask what they should do to protect these freedoms, which will remain, to which the government will remain accountable towards their rights. So here, this right-based development is aimed at promoting both accountability and also, as we said, under the Panchayat Raj model of governance, some kind of a consultation model. So here, and the advocates and this particular model tends to advocate some kind of inherent relationship with the downward accountability in relation to development. In other words, this right-based model of development will be a accountable mechanism, not only accountable to the institution bearers. It is also felt that it will also promote accountability downward to the lowest end, where every institution will feel accountable no matter where they are located. When you talk about accountability, we probably always think that it is the central government which is accountable, not the state government agencies or not the local agencies. Because if you talk of Nagaland, if you talk of Assam, you have various, Assam has Panchayati Raj, but Nagaland has developmental village councils, and where we probably find that we can do anything in the council model, but we will only hold either the state government agencies or the national government agencies accountable. But this particular model tends to talk of accountability of all the agencies which are located not only at the highest level, at the medium level, middle level, and also at the lowest level too. And this model tends to ensure a kind of power dynamic in development for downward accountability, for ensuring the intended beneficiaries are allowed their rights. In other words, the accountability is primarily aimed at enabling the right holders to be able to enjoy their rights and not feel a sense of exclusion from the so-called development process. And within this theory, I will conclude here: the development can no longer be viewed as a kind of a gift or a need, but it will be treated as a right that states and governments are to remain accountable for. And it is believed that if such a model is followed, it is being expected that the ethnic conflicts in the northeastern region can be brought to an end, and as respect for the rights of ethnic communities will be ensured, and will facilitate trust and mutual respect for each other within the ethnic community, across the ethnic communities, and vis-a-vis the state versus the ethnic community vis-a-vis the state. Since development and anymore, development will not be seen as any kind of a process of deprivation for certain ethnic communities, which the poor marginalized communities would be kept away from development, and will probably bring an end to the so-called welfareism, which had been the cause of various conflicts which are rampant in our respective communities, not only in the northeastern region but also in other parts of the world. I think we'll end it here. It was nice to be able to talk to you about ethnic conflicts, which has been there. Although I don't, and this is where I think my only understanding is that by looking at the problems not from our own ethnic perspective, which is being talked about traditionally for all these years, right, bordering from 1947, as the new Indians, we should be able to look at the international kind of frameworks which are being talked about, and we must also advocate both in our speech, in our action, in our research, as to demand or emphasize on the integration of those ideas into our own politics, so to say, which also includes the policies, the policy making, and also the narrow politicking that is involved in the political process. And by that way, we will be able to reiterate our existence not only as very sane, intellectual human beings, but also would prove ourselves to be the harbingers of the new development, which our next generations are now looking forward to. I think in this context, we should remember that when you talk of sustainability aims at sustainability or sustainable system tends to aim at not enabling oneself to steal away from our next generation in terms of the resources which they need to, which they are in need of for their own development. So that way, will not only become self-responsible, will also be able to be examples for the next generation, where they would be able to proceed in the direction of their own self-development and also development of own communities. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you for yet another enlightening lecture. So I invite comments and questions if participants have any. Please come forward and ask if you have. Okay, sir. Sir, the question is from Sanjeev Surgyari. Sir, is history responsible for the conflict among the ethnic groups?
I think when we talked about when we was talking about history, we said everything has its own history, and the point is that, and it also depends as to who writes history for whom and to what extent. And as you know, even if we are in an age of scientific inquiry, where we are supposed to be adopting more and more scientific techniques in order to research on any particular issue, or even writing the history or writing about any community, we still see that there has been a kind of a self glorification where we tend to aggravate the kind of differences that may be existing amongst the communities at any particular in a particular geographical location or in a particular geographical time, and which needs to call for a very kind of a serious and balanced inquiry. And since much of it, I think somebody must have been talking to about media, and here you find that even in the age of scientificism, the media or any kind of intellectual exercise is not free from any kind of a narrow motivation. And that is how we find it. And then we also, and since history tends to exaggerate the kind of, and as we call it, aggravated sense of alienation of the communities, it can certainly be held responsible for the kind of conflict that is present in the ethnic communities. But more and more, if we start writing the truth, then things probably will be different. And here, we also have to give up a sense of kind of a marginalization and self-marginalization, where we feel that we are probably not have been benefited from the developmental policies which have been carried on by the government of the day, and where we need to also emphasize that given the limitation that any government at any point of time has, it certainly tries to undertake the activities, and more our political system needs to modernize itself, needs to be made more accountable. I think that's why in that context I was saying that if you talk about the 5T model which is being adopted by Naveen Patnaik, I think Odisha is the only state where the whole decision making process is now totally based on information technology. It is a paperless governance, and we very fine. And then given the new kind of legislation which have come up in our own country, which is known right to information, people would be able to know as to how the decisions have been taken and whether the decisions were really negative as it is being propagated by the interested groups, or it was really, or the problem lied elsewhere. And this is where we need to not only call for political reforms, we also need to call for our own intellectual reforms, where we need to change our intellectual lens and try to write the truth rather than being, as we say, offering ourselves to be led by our nose. Led by our nose, I think this is a particular word, phrase you must have used in English, where people, instead of applying their mind, they tend to believe what is being said rather than bring in the critical outlook.
Any other questions? Because I'm afraid the time is
time is out. Yeah,
already another resource person has already joined. Yes. So I don't see any questions. So let me take this opportunity to express our heartfelt gratitude to Sir. Sir has been such a help. Sir has been so cooperative with us. Otherwise we were in a bit of a crisis. So because of him, we are managing well. So thank you, sir, for doing that every time. And sir, thank you so much, sir. Thank you is not enough, but this is what we can do. Thank you so much, sir. So we move on to the next session. I saw our resource person, she joined. Yes. So good morning, ma'am. Good morning and welcome, ma'am. We are very happy to see you, ma'am. Ma'am, yeah, I think you are muted. Oh no, it's fine. So good morning, participants. This lecture will be delivered by Professor Sunita Murmu. So we are very happy and we are very privileged that she agreed to speak to us. So before we request her to begin the session, I would like to give a short introduction of ma'am. Professor Sunita Murmu is professor in the Department of English, Deen Dayal Upadhyay, Gorakhpur University. She did her post-graduation from JNU New Delhi. and her research was on the nation in colonial and post-colonial fiction, Bankim, Tagore, Raja Rao, and Rushdie. She specializes in post-colonial literatures, African writings, literature and gender, and literature and environment. She has co-edited two collections of critical essays, Representation and Resistance, essays on post-colonial theater and drama and literatures of South Asia. So, ma'am, we request you to begin the lecture, ma'am. So I hand over the session to you, ma'am. Looking forward to listening to your lecture.
Good morning, ma'am. Good morning. Ma'am, you are muted, I think. Oh, okay. Ma'am, your sound is not coming. Ma'am, your sound is not coming.
Hello. Participants, please bear with her. She will be joining with another system. You know, this system is creating some problem, so she will be joining soon. Just give us some 2 minutes, okay? Dr. Devi, she did not announce the topic. She will be doing that. She has not given us the topic. Okay, so